In Square Enix's time as a developer and publisher, it has been responsible for some real stinkers. Some of its games have been subject to poor reviews, poor sales, or an unfortunate mix of both. These are a few of Square Enix's biggest bombs. Children of Mana was a pretty polarizing entry in the long-running Mana franchise, but it wasn't until Heroes of Mana that some fans truly began questioning the direction of the series. It didn't help that the shadow of the super-successful Secret of Mana loomed over every game before and after it, and nothing really lived up to those expectations. Heroes of Mana producer Koichi Ishii tried to attract a new crowd by adding an entirely different genre to the table: real-time strategy. Unfortunately for Ishii, the consumer market in Japan at the time wasn't ready to embrace RTS games. He knew this, and he had hoped Heroes of Mana would be the game to break the mold. Instead, it fell to the wayside without penetrating the market in any meaningful way, despite the producer's confidence and good intentions. Internationally, the game wasn't well received either, earning mostly mixed reviews. The weak reception was most apparent when Square Enix revealed its results in the first half of the fiscal year of 2007. Across the board, Heroes of Mana ranked low on the number of units sold both in Japan and North America. Back in 2009, Square Enix dipped its toes into the twin-stick shooter genre by backing a Japanese game developer named Golty. The studio doesn't have any major well-known hits under its belt, and it primarily developed shoot-'em-ups, kind of a niche genre in gaming. One of its early titles was a game called Zero Day Attack on Earth. Never heard of it? Yeah, that sounds about right. It was basically a tiny, not terribly innovative title that was released on Xbox 360 via the Xbox Live Arcade, retailing for about $15. The little-known title wasn't met with any sort of praise. In fact, the game was savagely criticized by reviewers, culminating in an abysmal 41 average score on Metacritic. The gameplay itself is so straightforward it's dull. For example, every boss can be killed with the exact same strategy, which involves standing still and blasting all of your weapons at it. In a genre renowned for fast reflexes and quick thinking, Zero Day barely engages the player, and the useless AI companions are mostly just around to get themselves killed. You could alleviate the AI problems by playing the game cooperatively with friends, but chances are you and your friends would rather do almost anything else. Nier might be the most baffling title to appear on this list. By all accounts, it failed upon launch. Its PlayStation 3 release drew an average rating of 68 on Metacritic, and many reviewers found it to be an uneven and unusual experience. All of the mechanics, which somehow combined Zelda-style world exploration, hack-and-slash combat, and shoot-'em-up gameplay, were jarring and hard to grasp, and many bemoaned the graphics, which weren't that great even for the time. Even game director Yoko Taro admitted to Nier's faults. In an interview with Polygon in 2015, the ever-masked eccentric quipped, "The way I look at original Nier, it's like your mom's home cooking. It may not be great, but it's okay. You're comfortable with it." In Japan, two nearly identical versions of the game were released at the same time: Nier Gestalt for the Xbox 360 and Nier Replicant for the PS3. Replicant sold surprisingly well in Japan, moving 60,000 copies in its first week. Gestalt, on the other hand, was a version that made its way around the world, suffering from poor sales and middling reviews. Needless to say, it didn't seem like a game that would have a sequel that would go on to sell more than 4 million copies, but here we are.
Beautiful, beautiful. I must be beautiful.
Final Fantasy XIV as it exists today makes a compelling case for giving games a second chance. The current iteration, released under the subtitle A Realm Reborn, completely overhauled the original release. This restructuring made it one of the most successful MMORPGs in recent memory, racking up a whopping 14 million players by its 5th anniversary. But Final Fantasy XIV wasn't always this praised. When it launched on PC in 2010, the name alone was practically toxic to the Square Enix brand. Even CEO Yoichi Wada admitted it. In 2011, he told a Japanese publication, "The Final Fantasy brand has been greatly damaged." The original Final Fantasy XIV released to shocking reviews, earning a Metacritic average of 49 on PC. Reviewers hounded the game for its broken user interface and game-breaking bugs. Perhaps worst of all, many commented that the content was generally uninteresting and tedious. Square Enix took its time restructuring the original game. It even extended the free trial period for prospective customers indefinitely until the company figured out what to do. By December 2010, the company cut its annual net profit forecast down to 10% of what it once was. While no one specifically blamed Final Fantasy XIV, a spokesperson did tell Gamatsu it had not, quote, "achieved the level of customer satisfaction that fans of our Final Fantasy franchise have come to expect." In 2015, Square Enix announced that it formed a new development house named Tokyo RPG Factory. The first game the studio would work on was mysteriously dubbed Project Setsuna, which would obviously be an RPG. The game went on to be released under the name I Am Setsuna, which cemented the studio's main purpose, to prey upon people's nostalgia for the old-school JRPGs of yesteryear. I Am Setsuna's battle system evokes flashbacks of the classic game Chrono Trigger. Even the ability X-Strike makes a return. Everything about its user interface felt like a 1990s JRPG brought into the modern day. It released in 2016 to admirable reviews, leveling out at 74 on Metacritic for PlayStation 4. Many reviewers enjoyed the many homages to the games of the past, but some criticized it for not doing much more than that. However, Tokyo RPG Factory suffered some hefty losses after the release of I Am Setsuna. Despite the fair praise and focus on nostalgia, the studio posted a 244 million yen loss just 2 weeks after the game went on sale. This is after the game sold more than 60,000 copies in its first week in Japan. Things haven't gotten much better for Tokyo RPG Factory since then. After the release of I Am Setsuna in 2016, Tokyo RPG Factory shifted its gears towards its next big project, Lost Sphear. Lo and behold, it was yet another nostalgia-fueled JRPG, and it was pitched as the spiritual successor to I Am Setsuna. Lost Sphear received similar review scores compared to its predecessor, with its PlayStation 4 Metacritic average clocking in at 68, even worse than the studio's first project. Things, however, took a turn for the worse for Tokyo RPG Factory. In its opening week in Japan, Lost Sphear sold a total of 13,133 units across the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. For context, that was only 20% of the first shipment Square Enix sent out to the Japanese market. That pales in comparison to I Am Setsuna's opening week, which saw more than 60,000 PS4 and PlayStation Vita copies sold. Despite moving that merchandise, Tokyo RPG Factory reported a loss of more than $2 million 2 weeks after launch. We can't imagine what that means for the studio after the sparse sales of Lost Sphear. If you don't remember The Quiet Man, we can't blame you. The game received a surprise announcement at E3 2018 via a flashy, partially live-action trailer. It was mysterious, and the perspective of a deaf main character was something new and exciting, especially from an industry giant like Square Enix. When it was finally released in November 2018 though, no one was ready for how terrible the game would be. Receiving an abysmal 29 on Metacritic for PlayStation 4, the game was panned for its awful design choices, particularly surrounding the narrative. The protagonist, Dane, can understand other characters despite his deafness. However, since the game cuts out all the audio in the first playthrough, you, the player, most likely can't understand anything. The Quiet Man received a patch 1 week after release that added the audio, but it only worked for players if they had already beaten the game once. Between these obtuse cutscenes lie some brain-dead combat sequences. At every step of the way, this game challenges players to not engage with it, and for all intents and purposes, it succeeds. In all other regards, well...
You failed.
The story of Left Alive is a sad one. The recent spiritual successor to the long-running Front Mission franchise released in Japan a week earlier than it did in the West. But that week was all we needed to see that something terrible was happening. The game launched February 28, 2019 in Japan, and by March 3rd, outlets reported that Square Enix had patched out the ability to stream the game using the PlayStation 4 share function. Around the same time, reports came in saying that Amazon Japan had already slashed the price of the game to nearly 50% off. The game would then launch for North America on March 5th, and boy was it ugly. With all it's said and done, the Metacritic average for the PS4 edition of Left Alive sits at 37, a clear sign of the game's lack of quality. Many critics pointed to a general lack of polish, and an unexpectedly high difficulty puts off anyone who even tries to play it. The game was a complete failure in both the West and Japan. In fact, by March 8th, some brick-and-mortar stores in Japan were selling the game at 60% off. To add salt to the wound, Amazon Japan deepened its discount to 67% off. Unlimited SaGa is the 9th entry in the SaGa franchise, which has been around since the first game's release on the original Game Boy in Japan in 1989. When it launched on the PlayStation 2 in 2002, it did well in Japan, selling more than 196,000 copies in the first week alone. By the middle of 2003, it sold more than 500,000 copies, earning it a gold prize from Sony at its 9th annual PlayStation Awards. So why would a game like Unlimited SaGa be on this list? Well, a majority of the game's success was confined to the shores of Japan. Beyond its borders, Unlimited Unlimited SaGa failed to impress anyone. On its Metacritic page, not a single one of the 26 curated reviews gives the game a positive score. The average score sits at 45. Many Western reviewers criticize the game's overly complex mechanics. The combat in Unlimited SaGa involves a real system, as if you were playing a game of slots and betting on pure chance. Exploring the world is done through a board game-like user interface that was obtuse. As a holistic package, the game had no merits, leading to a nearly universal dislike of the title, at least by Western standards. Airtight Games, the studio behind Murdered Soul Suspect, never exactly caught a break in the gaming industry. Back in 2010, the studio released its debut game, Dark Void, with the help of Capcom. It didn't make much of an impact in the community, but the studio stuck around to develop a few more games. Its last one was Soul Suspect, published by Square Enix, which also barely made a splash in the community at large. Its middling reviews painted an unattractive picture of the narrative and gameplay, which many critics considered bland and repetitive. In the weeks after Soul Suspect's release, things weren't looking alright for Airtight. Mere weeks after launch, the Redmond, Washington studio completely shut down without warning. GeekWire reported the story first, including a somber photo of the studio's front door covered by a sign that read, quote, "Office equipment blowout sale, company closing doors." Later on Twitter, the company's official account posted 2 solemn tweets which read, "Thanks to all of the fans, family, friends, and colleagues who supported us and made the last 10 years possible." And, "Thanks to all of the amazing people that worked on Dark Void, Quantum Conundrum, Murdered, Soul Fjord, Pixeled, and Dirt Bike." While Soul Suspect wasn't necessarily cited as the reason the studio closed its doors, it's suspicious how close the game's release was to Airtight's shutdown. Perhaps in a different world where Soul Suspect sold well, would see the company producing games today. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more SVG videos about your favorite games are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.